From Burleson to Venus and Grandview to Godley, this is the voice of Johnson County, JOCO Community Radio.
Hey travelers, do you want to save money on your next flight? Then pick up the phone and call. That's right, call, because the best prices are not online. They're with SmartFares. See, SmartFares has special deals with the airlines. When they have unsold seats, they use SmartFares to fill them. So you get airline tickets at ridiculously low prices. Our prices are too low to publish online. With the extra money you'll save, you can book another trip or treat yourself to dinner or shopping. So stop searching all of those travel sites to find the lowest price on your next flight. Let one of our SmartFares expert travel agents find ridiculously low prices for you. Call SmartFares today and get the best price on your next flight. Guaranteed. Also, save up to 50% off business and first class tickets.
855-325-1820. 855-325-1820. That's 855-325-1820.
Have you ever met a single person in your life that enjoys paying taxes? No one does. If you can't sleep at night because you have a huge problem with the IRS, I've got some free advice for you. This service is strictly limited to individuals that owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes. And if you qualify, we can guarantee that you won't be writing a big fat check to the IRS, or our services cost you nothing. The first 100 people that call today will get a free tax consultation worth $500. Stop worrying about your IRS problem. We can help you, we promise. Call the tax doctor right now. I mean right now, to learn more.
800-240-4587. 800-240-4587. 800-240-4587. That's 800-240-4587.
Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395.
Why have thousands of aspiring authors teamed up with Christian Faith Publishing to publish their book? Because Christian Faith Publishing is an author-friendly publisher who understands that your labor is more than just a book. We provide authors freedom and flexibility throughout the publishing process, professional book editing, award-winning design, and some of the highest royalty structures in the publishing industry. And as always, you will retain 100% of the rights to your book.
I was looking to find a company that I could trust, one that assisted in the editing process completely.
The most important qualities that I was looking for was a publisher who was honest and upfront, no hidden costs or fees, and owning the rights to my own work.
Christian Faith Publishing will publish, market, and sell your books in all major bookstores, online booksellers, as well as specialty Christian bookstores. Call for your free author submission kit.
800-978-4812. 800-978-4812. 800-978-4812. That's 800-978-4812.
Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395.
You're listening to JOCO Community Radio.
Well, good afternoon, Johnson County. Welcome back on this beautiful Tuesday afternoon. We are blessed by God to have such a wonderful day here. It's beautiful outside, nice and decently warm for today. Let's see if we can get this going on here for y'all. There we go. So welcome back to today's episode of Let Freedom Ring. I'm your host, Jake Wernette. Many of you might not have seen me for the last week. We were in Colorado having a leisure vacation this year instead of going to visit family. We are back in town, and it's wonderful to be back with everybody. It's really nice to have a place where we can come and discuss the pertinent issues facing our country, the crises facing our citizens, and the imperativeness of finding a solution to these problems. Today's going to be more of a current events and Middle East paradigm. I'm going to be starting off this first segment by discussing a few of my favorite articles that I have recently found. Many of them, if you haven't watched this show before, I am a big McCarthyist. I believe that Senator Joe McCarthy was right, and I do believe that we have communists working in our federal government. If that's not evident enough to the American population right now, then perhaps everybody in this country needs to go out and buy glasses so that they can see straight, or they need to do the better alternative and just go repent of their sins so their souls can see what is morally right. And I don't say this to be condescending, to be degrading. I love this country with all my heart, and I believe that my job as a citizen, whether I am an elected official or in elected office or not, we all have an obligation. We all have a duty and an allegiance to this country. It should not be questioned. It should be unequivocal, the allegiance that we hold to our own country over that we hold to anything else, whether it's a political party, whether it's to a candidate, whether it's to a non-governmental organization, whether you belong to Dogs and Cats Playtime Club. The number one thing that every American should have allegiance to is this country. And the communists do not care. They really don't. They don't care what side of the aisle you're on. They don't care whether you're black or white, Asian, Hispanic. The only thing that communists want is this country in the grave. And that's where we're heading with these articles today. So the first segment, we're going to be discussing that. Second segment, I'm going to be reviewing a book and discussing why I think everybody here should read it. It's called Ike's Gamble by Michael Doran. He is a member of a few different institutes, the Hudson Institute, which is a conservative think tank in D.C. So Ike's Gamble, America's Rise to Dominance in the Middle East. I finished this whole book in one day on a 12-hour road trip. I'm going to be discussing how America, yes, you heard straight, America, the longtime best friend and ally of the state of Israel, we like to tout, was not always that way. A misinformed president was lied to by the CIA to creating the state of Palestine in an effort to secure exports and oil resources for the United States at a cheap price, while the CIA under Alan Dulles and John Foster Dulles in the State Department, the two shady cats in the room, were seeking to install a military dictator in the state of Egypt and blame the conflict with Israel as the source of why we need to institute military dictators in the Middle East to get resources, which is as imperialistic as it comes. It's not something to be taken lightly. And that's where we are with Palestine and Israel today. Is a lot of it comes from these coups, these military dictatorships, these concepts that go back way back to the 50s. And a lot of people, you will hear it said that these religious wars between the Jews and the Islam and the Muslim people and the Arab states, all this stuff goes back 2,000 years. And you're right. But that's not where this whole idea of free Palestine and the state started. This whole two-state solution came about in the 50s because two Ivy League elitists with the last name Dulles thought we could secure enough resources for this country for the foreseeable future if we took advantage of the people of Israel and took advantage of the people of Egypt and the people of Sinai and the people of Palestine so that we can secure our own interests before that of the people that need those resources in their own countries. So we're going to be discussing that the second segment. I'm just going to jump right in here to the articles. I've got so many of these that are my favorites today. I'm going to save the NBC one for a little bit. I really like the title of it, and you'll see why here in a minute. I'm saying the communists are already here, if that's not evident enough. Might as well start off with this really good one from Wired. Secretive White House surveillance program gives cops access to trillions of U.S. phone records. For those who don't know, this article came out November 20th of this year at 1:30 p.m. Less than 8 days ago, last week, while you were busy stuffing your face with turkey and dressing, or the cheap tacos that you got from the taco truck that had salmonella because you couldn't afford Joe Biden's economy anymore, this was what your government was busy doing for you. We're not going to reduce the prices of your goods, but we're going to let you be incriminated because of your disdain for this government and this administration over your phone calls. So, a Wired analysis of leaked police documents verifies that a secretive government program is allowing federal, state, and local law enforcement to access phone records of Americans who are not suspected of a crime. You heard it first right here on Let Freedom Ring, who are not suspected of a crime. So, why do they need my phone calls? A little known surveillance program tracks more than 1 trillion domestic phone records within the U.S. each year, according to a letter Wire obtained that was sent by U.S. Senator Ron Wyden to the Department of Justice on Sunday, challenging the program's legality. According to the letter, a surveillance program, I'm going to read this twice here so you can go on Google here and look it up while we're discussing it. The Data Analytical Services, DAS, Data Analytical Services, has for more than a decade allowed federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies to mine the details of Americans' calls, analyzing phone records of countless people who are not suspected of any crime, including the victims of crimes. Using a technique known as chain analysis, the program targets not only those in a direct phone contact with criminal suspects, but anyone who they may have been in contact with as well. DAS is formerly known as Hemisphere. Project Hemisphere is run in coordination with the telecom giant AT&T, which captures and conducts analysis of U.S. call recorded for law enforcement agencies, from local sheriff's departments to U.S. customs officials, according to a White House memo reviewed by Wired. They reached out to AT&T, and the spokesperson, Kim Hart Johnson, AT&T, of course, declined, saying that the company was only required to comply with a lawful subpoena. AT&T, add that to another list of people that you don't do business with. There are a lot of people that do business with them here in Burleson. Now they've got your phone calls. And they're really willing to work with Merrick Garland and the rest of these swamp monsters to get everybody, every last living person that is a dissident to communism in this country will be rounded up and arrested if this continues unlawfully. And yet AT&T has the audacity to sit here and say, well, unless you come and give us a lawful subpoena, we're not going to comment on things that we should not be doing or things that we are not obligated to be doing. I'll tell you why they do it is because the federal government gives them money to do it. And you'll see that here in a second. There is no law requiring AT&T to store decades worth of Americans' phone calls for law enforcement purposes. Documents reviewed by Wired show that AT&T officials have attended law enforcement conferences in Texas as recently as 2018 to train officials on how to utilize AT&T's voluntary, albeit revenue-generating assistance. Amazing. I'm going to skip down a little bit. You read this for yourself. It's on Wired. First disclosed by the New York Times in 2013 as Hemisphere, the DAS program, renamed in 2013, has since largely flown under the radar. Internal records concerning the program's secrecy that were obtained by newspapers at the time show that law enforcement had been instructed to never refer to Hemisphere in any official document. So who knows what other name this has gone under. DAS was under an affiliated program called HIDTA, the White House's Office of National Drug Council Control Policy. The high-intensity drug trafficking areas, 33 different regions in the United States, was where this program evolved from. Wyden's letter to Garland said, the scale of data available to and routinely searched for the benefit of law enforcement is stunning in its scope. An internal participant guide reviewed by Wired shows the HIDTA, I'm going to call it HIDTA from now on, funding exceeds $280 million in 2020 alone. Yes, Donald Trump's presidency supported illegal surveillance on the United States in part of the budget. The president could have vetoed the budget and sent it back to Congress and said, I'm not approving this because it's got mass surveillance. Well, I wonder why Trump didn't do that. Maybe I am not saying that I don't hate or I do hate Trump. What I am trying to say is he should be questioned just like every other official for why a Republican president knowingly signed off on a budget unless his aides or whoever was working in the Oval Office at the time just really didn't read it very well and say, Mr. President, there's something concerning in here that is illegal unless you have warrants. Probable cause is the biggest lie in American history now. There is nothing in my Constitution that says I have to let anybody search or seize anything. Matter of fact, that is prohibited unless they have my consent. It says earlier this month, Wyden and other lawmakers in the House and Senate introduced comprehensive privacy legislation known as Government Surveillance Reform Act. The bill contains numerous provisions that, if enacted, would patch most, if not all, of the loopholes, effectively rendering the DAS program in its current form explicitly illegal. Well, it is already illegal under the United States Constitution, which happens to have been the law of the land for almost 250 years now. So why should it be outlawed if the government is not given that power explicitly by the Constitution, which is not the government's regulation of the citizens telling them, here is the rights that you are allowed to have. That's not how this works, people. The federal government is regulated to what powers it is given by our Constitution. Not given the enumerated powers, Congress has the methods and the apparatus to create federal departments, federal offices to help administer congressional goals and policy procedure. But they are not allowed to spy on us without the consent of the governed, which nobody in their right mind would even allow that to happen. I've got a few articles here about regime change in the Middle East that we're going to be discussing with the book. Moderna is spying on you too, so it's not just the federal government and AT&T that you need to be cutting your business with. You might want to be questioning whether your medicine's made by Moderna now, apparently too. This comes from, oh goodness, Li Fang and Jack Paulson. Moderna is spying on you. New documents reveal its attempt to control the vaccine debate. Now, I don't care whether you're pro-vax or anti-vax or you're just in the middle waiting for more evidence to come out. It's wrong for a private company to be changing the game by telling people what they can and can't say online, what they can and can't post. This republic, I don't give two craps about who has anything against me saying this on here. This republic was founded on suspicion of the government and suspicion of oligarchs. Plain and simple. We were not founded in this continent. God did not give us manifest destiny because we licked the boots of King George, or we sat down and rolled over for King Louis, or because we sent millions of Americans because Citizen Genet wanted to court all of our naval troops and send them over to fight in a French war, which is what was going on. A lot of Americans were taken aboard British ships and forced to fight with the British. Is that what this republic is founded on? Now courting the American citizens into being troops for the tyrants? Far from viral deception, much of the content flagged by Moderna's as misinformation and a supposed danger to public health was nothing of the sort. It was legitimate discussion of vaccine-related issues, but the Moderna misinformation reports reported here for the first time reveal what the pharmaceutical company is willing to do to shape public discourse around its marquee product and even affect policy making. The mRNA vaccine capitulated the company to $100 billion valuation and minted 5 new billionaires, including the chief executive Stephanie Bancel, its chairman, and Nubar Afayeen co-founder Robert Langers, President Stephen Hogue, and Timothy Springer, a Harvard Medical School professor and early investor. Wonder how he knew to invest in that. The most important thing for Moderna is that people keep having their jabs. Smart ads are part of that, but more importantly, it is to push back aggressively against any prevailing anti-vax narrative and engage where possible in any discussions around vaccine policy. That's where the Moderna disinformation department comes in. Behind the scenes, the marketing arm of the company has been working with former law enforcement officials and public health officials to monitor and influence vaccine policy. Key to this is a drug industry funded non governmental organization called Public Good Projects. Look it up on there on what's it called? Open source. It's the government website that the Federal Election Commission comes out with. Open Secrets, something like that, where you can look at all the funding where the NGOs put their money. Go see if anybody here in Texas is getting money from public good projects. Look it up. Uh, See for yourself which elected officials need to get booted out next time. According to the documents we have seen, PGP, Public Good Projects, worked closely with social media platforms, government agencies, and news websites to confront the root cause of vaccine hesitancy by rapidly identifying and shutting down misinformation. A network of 45,000 healthcare officials are given talking points and advice on how to respond when vaccine misinformation goes mainstream, according to an email from Moderna. I'm just I'm going over the highlighted sections of my favorite thing here. So if you want to read the whole article, it's called Moderna is Spying on You. New documents reveal its attempts to control the vaccine debate. With PGP, Public Goods Projects, Moderna is monitoring a huge range of mainstream outlets as well as unconventional ones such as Steam, online gaming community, and Medium. So they're not only are they going after your social medias on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever. They're now going after your kids on Steam, a place where kids go online and play video games. Next time you go in to see your son Billy on the computer or on his cell phone or on his tablet going on Steam gaming, you might want to check in the little corner at the bottom and see if there's a advertised by Moderna sticker on there now. Meanwhile, Moderna also retains Talkwalker, which uses its Blue Silk artificial intelligence to monitor vaccine related conversations across 150 million websites in nearly 200 countries. Discussions around competitor issues, including discussions of Pfizer, are flagged as well as vaccine hesitancy. None of the reports that we have seen makes any attempt to dispute the claims made. Rather, the claims are automatically deemed misinformation. So there's no debating it with these guys if they encourage vaccine hesitancy. We approached Moderna for a comment, but just like AT&T, didn't respond. Just got lost in the trash somewhere. Does anyone really want to live under a regime where their social media feed is essentially curated by government and multinational corporate interests? Well, that's what's going on in Canada right now. Anybody who hasn't seen what's going on with the Canadian Parliament, Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister up there, outlawed putting news on Instagram and Facebook. So people can't even see news on there. Now they have to go to the government-sponsored channels to go see their news. It's coming to a United States near you. Of course, by you, I mean the only one that we have in the entire world. Where freedom is lost here, there's nowhere else to escape to. We have discovered through internal emails from Twitter that PGP, Public Good Projects misinformation reporting team, was frequently in contact with Todd O'Boyle, a lobbyist at Twitter. So if anybody knows if Todd O'Boyle is running for any offices soon, remember this video and send him periodic Excel sheets with accounts to amplify or censor. That's right. You heard it. Their intention, as we have gleaned from the emails exchanged, was not only to combat misinformation, but also to affect the content and tenor of public debate. While PGP, Public Good Projects, identified some obvious falsehoods, such as claims that the vaccines contain microchips or were divided to intentionally kill patients, many tweets flagged as misinformation were simply critical of vaccine passports and the other things, the little microchips that they're going to be putting in your hand here with the G20 summit meeting that we went over here a few weeks back. You remember that? Now, it's not just that you're a conspiracy theorist. You are now a conspiracy realist and are inhibiting the project of the global cabal here of communists. The Comintern has not died. It's just merely been reelected to the American federal government. Moderna's corporate intelligence and marketing team has worked closely with PGP again this year in its bid to shape the vaccine discourse as take-up drops off a cliff. That means nobody's getting these jabs anymore. Partnership expanded again in October with an official training program developed by Moderna and PGP alongside the American Board of Internal Medicine to help healthcare workers identify medical misinformation. As the pandemic abates, Moderna is, if anything, ratcheting up its surveillance operation with a keen interest in anything relating to policies designed to coerce vaccination. In particular, the company is closely tracking elected officials and recently passed laws in Arkansas and Texas. How funny they go after my home state and Texas because we're getting rid of vaccine mandates, making them illegal. You can't close churches anymore. Ask yourself that. Who closes a church for people getting sick? Not any good people that I would know. Politicians attempting to ban COVID-19 mandates, almost like we just epiphanied that out of thin air, or at least claiming to signals growing resistance to COVID-19 mitigations, reads one of the Moderna alerts. Given the company avoided publicly commenting on the mandate debate, this is revelatory. So there's two people spying on you. Now there's a third person. It's the White House. So this one's called the Washington Post. This one came out November 24th of 2023, just 4 days ago, by Jeff Stein and Taylor Lorenz. The viral $16 McDonald's meal that may explain voter anger at Biden. I don't think a McDonald's meal menu item explains my frustration at the machine. What really does is the machine continuously pissing on the American people and pissing away the American dream because they think they can spend money out the rear end and not ever be held accountable. We can go to war with as many people. We can send all of our money overseas. We can just print more of it. Just wait till things turn out like Zimbabwe and you see mothers eating their babies in the streets and you see people literally eating money to live. Happened in Rhodesia. It happened in Zimbabwe. So apparently criticizing your elected officials is now a crime that is misinformation. I tell you what's misinformation. There's another pandemic going around here. It's called stupid people getting into positions of high power that have no decency for the American people, no respect for what this country was founded on, and no legitimate circumstance to push their will unless they take every last freedom away from the American people. That's what this next pandemic is. It's control. It's exacerbating every artifice, every article of control that they can have over the American people so that the American people never recover from this. That's what it is. Posts on Reddit, it goes on to talk about these things. The McDonald's menu is not important. Janet Yellen, I haven't even harked on this woman enough. When asked about young voters' economic frustrations with the president by CNBC on Monday, Secretary Janet Yellen said, "I'm aware of that, and I think it's our job to explain to Americans what President Biden has done to improve the economy." Last time I checked, your job as a department official is not to go along blindly with your president. It's about enforcing good policy in your department where you are trusted by the American people and appointed by the majority of our Senate to go and communicate with the American people the policies that you are deriving with the Department of the Treasury. It's to balance a budget. It's to decide on the budget. It's to effectively work to mitigate interest rates, to work with the Federal Reserve to manage money, supply and demand, to balance the pocketbook of this country. It's not to go along with your president. Plenty of Republicans and Democrats alike have had people on the other side in the Department of the Treasury. It goes on to say, here's my favorite part, the part that I want to get at. These economists fear that these exaggerated stories will ultimately lead to a worse outcome, perhaps being Trump will win the re-election, and that it is vital to make clear that this remains by measures one of the best recoveries in modern U.S. history. They also express confusion over why consumers continue to spend so heavily if the pessimism is driven by economic insecurity. So if you can't afford things, you're poor and you're a peasant, you deserve to be under the boot of the government is what the Biden administration officially wants. The White House officials said the administration is working with TikTok creators to tell positive stories of Biden's economic stewardship. Oh, it's not dictatorship, it's stewardship now. My bad. While also working with social media platforms to counter misinformation again. Folks have bought burgers at the wrong place throughout the wrong time of history, and that includes economists at all other times. We would be looking at our burger bill and say, wow, I wish I'd done more addition and subtraction, said Justin Wolfers, an economist at the University of Michigan. At present moment, though, we instead say, wow, I hate this economy. Folks are viewing everything that they buy through that lens. Well, I wonder why. It's because you have sucky politicians in there. Don't tell the American people it's their fault that they have this lens. The American people never wanted to spend more. We never wanted stuff to go up from the 50s. It was 12 grand to buy a house in 1957, 4 grand to buy a new automobile. Who wants their government spending more money? Don't tell me that I'm not looking at things through a justifiable lens just because you're an establishment plant who works in a university who has been paid off by the Communist Party, who is now in control of this country because you want more research grants at the University of Michigan. We'll be right back with the second half. We'll be going over my last favorite article and reviewing a book that I think everybody needs to understand for the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Here's important new information from the Diabetes Solution Center for you, a family member, or a loved one suffering with diabetes. If you have lost your provider, or if you need a provider for diabetic supplies, you may qualify to receive your diabetic testing supplies now with little or no out-of-pocket cost, regardless of your age. All you need is Medicare or private insurance to be potentially eligible. Call the Diabetes Solution Center right now for details. Just takes a couple of minutes. Our friendly, knowledgeable agents will give you free, no-obligation information, handle all the insurance paperwork, and make sure your supplies are delivered directly to your door for free.
Call U.S. Medical Supply 24 hours a day. 800-597-9323. 800-597-9323. 800-597-9323. Call right now. 800-597-9323.
Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395.
You're listening to Joco Community Radio.
Welcome back to the second segment. I'm going to let Benny Goodman and his orchestra take it for a second. I'm going to get the computer up, get the design working back. Gosh, do I love Mission to Moscow. Wonderful song. So I'm not going to go over this article today, but I am going to recommend it as recommended reading to you. I know we haven't been in middle school for years now, but I feel like I just love the title of this. If there's nothing more evident about who is in control of the American media, then this explains it. So look up this article. It's on NBC News, the National Broadcasting Corporation, I believe it is. They're the National, I've got to come up with a funky name for these guys. We called NPR the National Propaganda Radio. I stand by that. Freedom of speech. It's under their Justice Department section. If you want, before Thursday's episode, I'll bring this up Thursday again. We'll read this article together. I'll go home and read this. I haven't finished it. It's 16 pages long. I spent the rest of it reading 2 or 3, 5 other articles. Read it with me. We'll be back on Thursday and discuss this. We're going to get in the Middle East paradigm now. NBC, Pablo Martinez Monsivies, I don't know if that's how you say it or not, Uh, Biden may have trouble cracking down on domestic terrorism because of free speech in the FBI. I'm going to save my anger for that for Thursday. Biden may have trouble. Listen to this again if you haven't. Biden may have trouble cracking down on domestic terrorism because of what? Before the FBI. Free speech. Well, God, if we just got rid of free speech, then everything would be easier for the government. Enslaving us, taking us to shooting walls, having the federal government's army plow us down with tanks in the street. Gosh, everything would be so much easier if everybody would just shut up and put tape over their mouth. It's what the tyrants think of you. The FBI didn't come first. Reforming the FBI didn't even come first in this. But then I love how it goes on down here in the subtitle to say cracking down on domestic extremists may seem straightforward, but Biden may face institutional, legal, and political hurdles, particularly at the FBI. So where's the explanation for what you described free speech inhibiting it? There in the article, NBC. Where's the explanation for that? Join me in reading it. We go home tonight. And we'll discuss that together Thursday. We'll do a call-in show Thursday, and you can tell the government what you think and tell NBC what you think as the citizens of this country about what they want to do with your free speech. So here's the article if you really don't believe me. Free speech is inhibiting the progress of your federal government. We're going to be reading that tonight. That's going to be recommended reading for all of us. We're going on to discuss the Middle East paradigm, why this two-state solution is the way it is, where it got here. First, I want to recommend another reading to everybody. It's a little bit longer. I say a little bit. It's about 200 and something pages longer than the NBC article is. It's by Michael Doran, a Middle East advisor to the White House, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, and a alumnus of Stanford and Princeton. I don't really have a high opinion of our theological seminary schools anymore because they've been turned into brain dead re-education centers, to put it plainly. He is a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. I have a very high respect of the Hudson Institute, establishment or not. I'm not sure. I haven't looked too much into the guys, but I follow them, and they have some tendencies to look very establishment in my eyes, but they seem like very logical people, which I respect. And the guy wrote a really good book. I love President Eisenhower, my favorite guy in the whole world, aside from Jesus Christ and my family. Eisenhower is one of my historical role models. It's called Ike's Gamble, America's Rise to Dominance in the Middle East by Michael Doran. I'm going to show it up to the camera there. That way, if anybody wants to buy the book, this is a former library copy. One of the libraries who no longer cares about Dwight Eisenhower got rid of it. I bought it online. So if you feel like taking a look at it, we can discuss the book in depth another day. I just want to get on to describing. I didn't start taking highlighted notes until the second half of the book, when it got pretty interesting. We got right into the Arab-Israeli conflict here. I'm just going to be going over a few of my highlighted sections and discussing why I thought it was important. He goes on to say, 3 days after the publication of the installment of The Philosophy of the Revolution, the Egyptians announced that their new foreign policy would be to seek and establish an Arab bloc based on the Arab League, which at that time included Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Yemen. Egypt dominated the organization, which founded in 1945, was located in Cairo and run by Abdel Rahman Azam, an Egyptian diplomat. In principle, the League stood for promoting greater cooperation among independent Arab states. This is after decolonization took place in Africa and the Middle East, especially in confronting Zionism and imperialism. Now, this is something the communists have been propelling. You're going to start seeing, after I read these parts, the parallel between what is going on now, Zionism and imperialism. I wonder who's touting that. Free Palestine. I don't have anything against Muslims. I don't have anything against Palestinians. I don't have anything against anybody wanting to live in a state called Palestine. I don't have just like I don't have anything against the rest of God's created equal people. The Jewish people, the Christian people, the people that are atheists, that are agnostic. We are all created by the same God. It might not be the same God the Muslims believe in, but I have a religion that tells me that I have to love everybody as Christ loved me. That is the greatest commandment and the greatest discipleship that a Christian can do is to love everybody equally as his God does. So, confronting Zionism and imperialism. Listen to the parallels here. In practice, Cairo, the capital of Egypt, used it with the support of the Saudis and the Syrians as a tool for blocking the regional ambitions of their common adversaries, Iraq and Jordan. As soon as the northern tier, that was founded after Nasser took power in Egypt, Alan Dulles, the CIA, went on to found the Northern Tier because they figured out that the alliance with Egypt wouldn't work. So they'd create a conflicting, competitive alliance that Egypt would certainly hate to drive Egypt back over to the United States side of things. Denounced as a menace to the Arab League, a plot to divide the Arabs in order to protect Israel and the British in the first half of 1954, the denunciations grew increasingly shrill. The CIA has long been accused of facilitating the transfer of ex Nazi intelligence officers to Egypt, some of whom contributed to Egyptian propaganda. I want everybody to think about the genocide politics that are being played into Free Palestine, pro Israel. Both sides are using the whole Nazi rhetoric here, and that's what we're seeing again. The CIA has long been accused of facilitating the transfer of ex Nazi intelligence officers. Reinhard Gehlen, read his book, to Egypt, some of whom contributed to propaganda. So listen to the parallels here. He goes on to say the first of these was integral unity, represented by the Hashemites. Jordan and Iraq advocated erasing borders drawn by the imperialists and creating larger states, leading eventually to the creation of a single Arab superstate in the Fertile Crescent. By contrast, the Egyptians championed the idea of Arab solidarity, standing against the united imperialists. Their view enjoyed the strong support of Saudi Arabia and the Syrian government, both of whom feared the expansion of Hashemite power. For Nasser, then, much was at stake for the fight with Nuri al Said. His status as the leader of the Arab world, the very currency that he traded with influence on the global stage, was based large on his ability to command the respect of his allies in Riyadh and Damascus. So, a single Arab superstate, that's politically active now. That's what's desired. Now we have the Nazi propaganda, genocide, ethnocentric politics, and now we have understanding who created the situation, the United States. Vehemently, Dulles faced a simple choice to support Egypt or Iraq. Without the slightest hesitation, he sided against America's avowed allies in the Cold War and sided with Egypt. Why? The answer can be summed up in one word: Palestine. Dulles was already deeply involved in plans to settle the Arab-Israeli conflict, and Nasser, Egyptian dictator, he believed held the keys to the settlement. Peacemaking in his mind trumped everything else. At the heart of the Alpha concept, the first concept to bringing about the compromise conflict here, was an effort to reduce the weight of the Israeli millstone. Schuckburg, the primary British architect of the project, described the essential idea as a plan whereby, in return for minimal Israeli concessions and with various forms of economic and material assistance from the West, the Arabs might be induced to make peace with Israel, and the U.S. UK would guarantee the settlement. Settlement of what? The concession of Israel, the taking of land to give to the Palestinian state. So this has been in planning since 1954 with the help of your CIA. The description is accurate except for the word minimal. In 1955, Schuckburg was more candid. Any initiative, if it is to be realistic and to avoid damaging even more seriously our position in the Arab world, will have to be something which the Israelis will detest. Among other concessions from the Israelis, it called for the internationalization of Jerusalem. Guess what? The opening of Jerusalem to the rest of the world and the rest of the world's religions, other than the treaty of the Third Crusade that was signed between the Israelis, the Arabs, and the British. It goes on to say the desert in southern Israel separating for Israel to withdraw from the Negev, the desert in southern Israel separating Egypt's Sinai Peninsula from Jordan. The Americans adopted Shuckburg's general outlook, but they scaled back the demands on Israel. Even so, the joint Anglo-American document stated plainly, Israel must make territorial concessions. The Arabs will not reconcile themselves to reaching a settlement with Israel with the present boundaries. At the end of January, I'm just flipping through pages here, the Egyptians had hanged Mashi Marzouk and Shmuel Azar, two Egyptian Jews who, as Israeli agents, participated in Operation Zuzana, a botched false flag operation set up by Israel to look like the work of communists and the Muslim Brotherhood, essentially bombing civilian places on Israel's command and making it look like the communists so the United States would be forced to intervene. Labeling Nuri al-Said a traitor and an ally of Israel and imperialism, Voice of the Arabs, the propaganda radio, called on the people of Iraq to rise up and topple him. In one typical broadcast, a dissident named Adnan al-Rawi addressed his words to the Turkish Prime Minister Adnan Menderes, who was visiting Baghdad to sign the pact, the Iraq Pact. Tomorrow, when the gates of the prisons are smashed, when the Iraqi people rise, when the prisons are smashed, when the new alliance is torn to pieces tomorrow, Menderes, you will see how the story ends. Tomorrow, the people will write with their own blood the last chapter. So it's always been about getting the violence. The best proof of potency of international Jewry is that the Soviet Union, while constantly hinting at the Arab states that it will agree to help the Arabs to dismember Israel, has never actually come out publicly with such a statement of support. The Soviets rely on hints, and they are playing the game very cautiously despite the great prize they could win in the Near East if they supported the destruction of Israel. This was went on from, I believe, either John Foster Dulles or Alan Dulles. One of them had said this in part of a greater grand scheme thing. We go on to discuss a few things about how the Palestine conflict will be set up, about absorbing Soviet equipment into the Egyptian army. But it's a very interesting concept. So essentially what happens is the Egyptian state, Gabriel Nasser, takes power in Egypt in the early 50s through a revolution. Nasser was formerly part of the cabinet of the last president of Egypt. Nasser takes power after his charm gets him to help the army take power in Egypt. Nasser takes power. Nasser appeals through the Muslim lens to the Arab states and says, we should really form an alliance where we all eventually become one state. So essentially what happens is the United States sends in propaganda telling them that Nasser is an ineffective leader. They did the same thing in Guatemala with Jacobo Arbenz. What happened with the United Fruit Company was the CIA set up a radio station in Miami and blasted radio frequencies to radios down in Guatemala. And they took a Guatemalan citizen, put him on the radio, and started beaming propaganda down there, telling them nationalizing the fruit to redistribute the land to peasants who had no land, who had no food, who had no income in Guatemala. Essentially, what Jacobo Arbenz wanted to do was create a state that would allow the peasants to rise up to become middle class. Now, if we look at communism, if we look at the socialist revolution, the archetype of how a socialist revolution takes place, it relies on there being two classes, the haves and the have-nots. That would be the elites and the peasants. Makes sense. You need a decently elite, at least upper peasant class person. What did the communists in Russia call them? The proletariat. You need somebody from the proletariat with the communist way of thought to lead and overthrow the revolution, if you will, implement socialism until No government is necessary, then communism will have its full-fledged day in the sun. So explain to me if Jacobo Arbenz wants to bring up peasants from the revolutionary class to the middle class. The communist goal is to get rid of the middle class, right? Consider that. Why would we oust Jacobo Arbenz for wanting to build a middle class in Guatemala? Why would we get rid of other people in other countries for wanting to build up a middle class? Doesn't it seem kind of counterintuitive to say that they're Soviet dominoes? The Soviet Union would take advantage of them if they had a middle class. It's way easier for the Soviet Union just to come in right now before Jacobo Arbenz or Nasser took power and say, if we can get you to overthrow your rulers, then we are more than willing to come in and set up the Comintern Soviet goodwill missions, sending money down here for your infrastructure project. We'll send the Soviet army to come down and defend you as long as you build us an Air Force base and this and that. The United States did this out of an effort because the United Fruit Company had people that worked at the CIA that they had lobbied with and said, we don't really want America's fruit industry to become more inefficient, to become more expensive. Well, you ask, why not just bring it to the United States? It'd be way easier and way cheaper for them to hire American citizens. Not when you can hire people for a slave wage. So ask yourself now, do we see American companies doing this today? Anglo-Iranian Oil Company did it in Iran in 54 with Mohammed Mossadegh, placing an oil tax for exports for the British. We saw it happen with the fruit company. Now we see it coming to take place here in Egypt because the Egyptians want what? They want to create an Arab bloc. And you have the whole Palestinian mindset of a, not necessarily a communist, but a domino government in Egypt, in Syria, in Jordan at the time. All these countries had coups going on so that Nasser could get his pro-Nasser people in, people that were going to be loyal to Egypt and the Egyptian ideology. Now, what we see here is they take advantage. I really do feel bad for the Muslim people because there are a lot of people that don't understand that they are being taken advantage of for their ideology, for their manpower, to wage an unjust war against the Jews, against the Christians, just like the Christians in the Crusades were a bunch of criminals that were released from Rome and sent down to fight and commit war crimes in the Middle East in an effort to wage a holy war for the Holy Land. Which, if it's the Holy Land, then why don't we give it to Israel? Why did it take until 1947? Why did the British want to keep the Holy Land if it was about that? So you have people on both sides that take advantage of the Christian mindset, the Muslim mindset, the Jewish mindset, and all it's about is maintaining control by one man for one man's goal. And we see that in this book. There's a lot of stuff that I'm just skimming through that I think people should read because it's essential to knowing how things are going now. It goes into discussing Kermit Roosevelt, the nephew of President Franklin Roosevelt, as a member of the CIA and the State Department, going over to build these relationships. In actual fact, the Israelis regarded the arms deal as an existential threat, a national emergency of the first order. The director of the CIA, like his brother, had his eyes on the power of the Israel lobby in Congress. The arms deal, he recognized, created the conditions for a coalition in Congress between supporters of Israel and right-wing anti-communists who now see Egypt, the enemy of Israel, as the enemy of the United States in the Cold War. Was this outcome a mere accident? Perhaps it was actually the intended result of the arms deal. On September 29th, 1955, 2 days after Nasser announced the agreement with the Soviet Union, Alan Dulles met with Evelyn Schuckberg and gave him a taste of his theory. A British note-taker kept a recording of his conversation. In discussing the Russian-Egyptian or the Russo-Egyptian arms deal, Mr. Dulles speculated about the Israel attitude. He thought so far that their action had been suspiciously mild and wondered if they might have encouraged, if not actually promoted the deal. Militarily, they had nothing to fear for the considerable period it would take to train the Egyptians in using any arms that they got. In the meantime, they would count on easier access to arms from the West. a more sympathetic attitude if they were to adopt a more aggressive policy. So essentially, what we see here is the United States beaming propaganda down into Egypt, telling them that their leader is ineffective. And when the coup had failed against Nasser, and Nasser kept staying in power, and we saw a lot more pro Nasser people getting put into positions of power in Syria and Lebanon, all these other countries. A lot of them are mentioned here in this Wikipedia article. You should go on there and look up the list of countries we've had coups against: 1952 Egypt, 1952 Guatemala, 52, 53 Iran, 54 Guatemala, 56 to 57 Syria, 57 to 59 Indonesia, 59 Iraq. I wonder why we have so many problems in the Middle East. Maybe it's because these people haven't elected their own democratic government, their own form of free will elected government the last 80 years. Maybe that's why every country in the Middle East hates us, is because we took out everybody that they had elected in there, because we didn't want to get cheap good. We didn't want to get expensive goods. We didn't want to pay for our oil. And we just can't have people going against who the United States says is or isn't our allies. So Eisenhower had a really, really tough time. There's another book called Eisenhower, It's called Eisenhower, the White House Years, by I believe Jim Newton. And literally on the last page of his book, about 258-page book, 300 and something odd pages, he says the CIA had lied to the president and misinformed him of the situation between Israel and Egypt and other stuff. So we have all of these coups that were done in the 50s because the CIA misinformed the American president. Ask yourself who the deep state is, and then take a look at these books and these articles. 52 in Egypt, they tried to get Nasser out by putting in another guy. Guatemala, PB Fortune, and then Operation PB Success to get Jacobo Arbenz out by setting up radio towers. Look into the Gulf War, how the statue in I believe it was the statue in Saudi Arabia or Kuwait got taken down. It might have been Iraq. It might have been Baghdad when they took over Baghdad. Look into the Gulf War, look into the Iraq War, one of those two. It was a U.S. Army psychological operations unit that had beamed in a high improvised frequency to a crowd of people. They had activists planted in the crowd. All these activists all of a sudden started saying, "Let's go after the statue of Saddam Hussein. Let's go after the statue." And that's when the tank pulled it down. That's how your revolution happened. Psychological operations. So you have these radios being beamed down from Miami, from Britain down into Egypt, down into these things. That's another thing I was going to get into. That's how the U.S. establishment gets around a lot of these things, is they have something called a Five Eyes Treaty. I believe Australia, Britain, France, and some other countries are part of it with the United States. You want to know how people start getting these phone records? It's because what the United States does is it builds CIA or whoever, for instance, laboratories, collection facilities in other countries. When they get something in the United States, they beam it across the globe and say another country found it. And then Britain will supposedly write the United States saying, "Hey, we found this concerning phone call from your people. Since we're spying on everybody else's people, we want to give all these trillions of records to you." And it's almost like the foreign government's just handing them over, and that's where the government's getting them from. But no, it's probably, and this is a hypothetical. I'm not saying anything's real. I'm not saying anything is happening, but it's plausible. It's like money laundering, but with communications. Essentially, what happens is the United States is in a predicament now where we have to decide what kind of leader we want to elect in 2024. Do we really want somebody who's going to keep letting corporations, keep letting all these blank budgets, keep letting all these things happen? Do we really want somebody getting rid of our free speech because it interferes with the mission of the federal government? The mission of the federal government was to protect the people from foreign aggressors. That's what the federal government was founded on. It was founded on whatever was in the Constitution: coining money, interstate commerce, protecting the American public from foreign aggressors, being able to defend themselves, enshrining our freedoms in the Bill of Rights in this elected government of ours. We're not a democracy. We're a Republican polity. We're a Republican state. So elect somebody, look into these books, these articles, and see who you want to elect next time. God bless you. God bless the United States of America. And may the blood of Jesus Christ pour over this government of ours. We desperately need it. Thank you. We'll see you Thursday.
From Burleson to Venus and Grandview to Godly, this is the voice of Johnson County. Joco Community.